Hello. After a long and exhausting day, it's time to slow down, clear your mind, and let the outside world gradually fade away. Find a comfortable place, dim the lights, and allow yourself to relax as tonight's dark and mysterious stories begin. Just remember, some stories stay with you long after the night is over. There is no town called Bellwether in western Nebraska. The state says so, the county says so, and the road where I found it runs through open grassland for almost 30 miles. I still have a brass motel key stamped Bellwether Room 6. Every October, just after midnight on the 17th, the number on the tag changes. This year it changed to 7. I was 42 when I first drove into Bellwether. At the time, I worked as a right-of-way agent for a regional power cooperative. Most of the job involved old deeds, utility easements, and long days spent explaining to landowners why a new transmission pole had to stand exactly where their grandfather had planted a cottonwood tree. My mother had died the previous spring after 3 years in assisted living. For most of that time, she had been diagnosed with vascular dementia. Some days she knew me. Some days she called me by her sister's name. Almost every evening, a few minutes before midnight, she recited a list of people I had never heard of. She always began with the same 3 names: Walter Briggs, Alma Reed, Thomas Vale. Then she continued in a low, careful voice, pausing between each person as though waiting for someone to answer. I used to sit beside her bed and let her finish. Later, when the list grew longer and my visits grew shorter, I began leaving before she reached the end. I told myself the names were fragments of old church rosters tangled together by illness. The last clear thing she ever said to me was, "You must not let the red tower go dark." There had never been a red tower in any town where she lived. 6 months after her funeral, I was sent to verify an easement along County Road 81 near the edge of the Sandhills. The cooperative planned to replace 11 miles of aging line before winter. A new survey showed one pole standing 200 feet outside the recorded corridor, and the legal department wanted photographs, measurements, and the signature of whoever owned the parcel. The parcel had no listed owner. That was unusual, but rural records can preserve gaps for decades. A farm may pass informally through a family, or a deed may refer to a creek that changed course long ago. I left North Platte late. By the time I turned north, the sun had dropped behind low gray clouds. I had half a tank of gas and a motel reservation 40 miles east. I should have reached the disputed pole by 10:30. At 11:15, my navigation screen froze. The blue route line remained visible, but the arrow stopped moving. My truck was still traveling at 50 miles an hour, and the odometer continued to turn. On the screen, however, I remained fixed beside a place labeled only as Unnamed Road. I pulled over and restarted the system. The wind had strengthened. Dry grass hissed against the shoulder, and loose gravel ticked beneath the truck. When the screen came back on, a new road appeared ahead of me. Bellwether Road. I knew the county map well enough to be certain it had not been there before. A green highway sign stood a quarter-mile farther on. The reflective paint was faded, but the letters were clean. Bellwether, population 83. Below that, someone had bolted a smaller white sign to the same posts. No services after midnight. I checked the clock on the dashboard. It was 11:23. The town appeared less than a mile beyond the sign, gathered in a shallow valley where the grass gave way to cottonwoods. I saw a water tower, a grain elevator, 2 rows of houses, and a narrow main street lit by yellow lamps. The water tower was painted a dark brick red. I slowed without meaning to. Bellwether looked old but not abandoned. Curtains glowed behind windows. A pickup sat outside a diner. A woman in a pale coat crossed the street carrying a paper grocery sack. Somewhere behind the buildings, a dog barked once. My phone showed no signal. I decided to stop for directions. The diner's sign read, "The Night Jar," in white glass letters. Inside, 6 people sat at the counter. No one spoke when I entered, though the room was not silent. A coffee maker clicked. A ceiling fan turned slowly. Silverware touched a plate somewhere near the kitchen. A woman in her 60s stood behind the register. Her gray hair was pinned close to her head, and she wore a blue cardigan over a white uniform. "We close in 30 minutes," she said. "I only need the road back to County 81. The woman looked toward the windows. "You came from the south?" "Yes. That road won't take you back tonight." "Is there another route?" "Not after 12. She said it without emphasis, the way someone might explain that a bridge was out or a gas station had closed for the season. I glanced at the clock above the pie case. It showed 11:31. The second hand was moving, but it hesitated at the top of each minute. A man at the counter turned on his stool. He had the narrow face and rough hands of someone who had spent his life working outdoors. "You can wait at Vale's," he said. "She keeps rooms." "I have a reservation east of here." "Not tonight, you don't." The woman behind the register gave him a warning look. He turned back to his coffee. I asked whether there was a public phone. The woman pointed to a black wall phone near the restrooms. I lifted the receiver and heard a low rushing sound, like wind moving through a distant culvert. When I dialed the motel, the rotary dial returned too slowly. The line clicked 3 times. Then my mother's voice said, very faintly, "Walter Briggs." I dropped the receiver. The woman behind the register did not seem surprised. "What did you hear?" she asked. "Nothing." She watched me for a moment, then poured coffee into a paper cup and set it on the counter. "You should go to the boarding house," she said. "Straight down Maine, left at the church. Don't take the road past the cemetery, even if your headlights show it open." "I'm not staying." "No," she said. "Most people say that the first time." I left the coffee untouched. Outside, the wind had stopped. The flags above the post office hung limp, though the cottonwood branches were still moving. My truck started normally. I drove back the way I had come. The green population sign appeared within 2 minutes. Beyond it, the road ended at a wire fence. My headlights shone across open grass. There was no intersection, no curve, and no track wide enough for a vehicle. The gravel simply narrowed, passed beneath the bottom strand of wire, and continued as 2 pale lines pressed into the field. I turned around. The town was behind me again, closer than it should have been. The red water tower stood above the rooftops. Its warning light blinked once every 8 seconds. I tried the east road, then the west, then the north. Each returned me to Main Street. By 11:45, I had used nearly a quarter tank of gas. The boarding house stood beside a small Lutheran church with frosted windows. A wooden sign above the porch read Vale House. The paint had peeled around the edges, but the porch light was bright. An elderly woman opened the door before I knocked. She was small and straight-backed, with silver hair cut at her jaw. She wore a dark dress and soft house shoes. Her eyes moved over my face slowly, not with suspicion, but recognition. "You have Evelyn's mouth," she said. Evelyn was my mother's name. I asked how she knew her. The woman stepped aside. "You'd better come in before the bell." The entry hall smelled of lemon oil and coal dust. 6 brass keys hung behind a narrow desk. 5 were on hooks. 1 lay on the blotter. Room 6. The woman introduced herself as Alma Vale. The last name made me think of my mother's list, though I remembered the third name as Thomas Vale, not Alma. I did not mention it. "I'm not staying the night," I said. "I only need to know how to get out. You can leave before 12, if the road allows it. It doesn't. Then it has already decided." She lifted the key and placed it in my hand. The brass was warm. "What happens at midnight?" "Nothing you would notice all at once." "That isn't an answer. It is the only honest one." I set the key back on the desk. Alma looked toward a tall clock in the hall. It showed 11:51. "You have 9 minutes," she said. "You can spend them arguing, or you can help me close the curtains." I should have left the house. I should have returned to my truck and kept driving until I ran out of fuel. Instead, I followed her into the front parlor and drew the curtains over 2 street-facing windows. Across the road, people were doing the same thing. Porch lights went out one by one. The diner sign darkened. A man carried a chair inside the barber shop. At the post office, a woman removed the flag and folded it with slow, practiced movements. No one ran. No one looked frightened. At 11:56, a bell began ringing somewhere near the center of town. It was not the church bell. The sound was lower and farther away, with a dull iron tone that seemed to come through the floorboards before it reached the air. Alma moved to the hall desk and opened a thick ledger bound in cracked brown leather.
What is that?
The register. For the boarding house? For Bellwether. The pages were filled with names. Each line included a house number, an occupation, and a year. Some entries had been crossed out, others had been rewritten in different ink. Alma placed one finger on the first line. "Walter Briggs," she said. The bell rang again. From outside, a man's voice answered, "Here." "Alma Reed." A woman answered from the house next door. "Thomas Vale." A voice came from upstairs. Alma continued down the page. As she read, voices answered from the street, nearby houses, distant rooms, and places I could not locate. Some were young, some were old. Each response was quiet. "Here. Here. Still here." The clock reached 11:59. The red light on the water tower blinked. Then it did not return. At midnight, the room became very still. The electric lamp beside the desk remained on, but its light no longer reached the corners. The walls seemed farther away. The air lost its smell. Even the pressure of the floor beneath my shoes felt uncertain, as if I were standing on something remembered rather than solid. Alma kept reading. A picture frame above the desk faded until only the glass remained. The hallway runner lost its pattern. Through a gap in the curtains, I saw the house across the street become flat and pale, then transparent enough for the stars to show through its roof. I stepped backward. The brass key was in my hand again. I did not remember picking it up. Alma reached the final line. "Evelyn Mercer," she said. My mother answered from the room above us. "Here." I could not breathe for several seconds. Alma closed the ledger. The clock stopped at 12:17. Every light in Bellwether went out. When I opened my eyes, I was sitting behind the wheel of my truck. The engine was off. Dawn lay across the grass in a thin silver line. My truck stood on the shoulder of County Road 81, beside the disputed transmission pole. There was no town, no side road, no cottonwoods, no church, no water tower. My phone had a signal again. It showed 7 missed calls from the motel and 1 voicemail from my supervisor. The clock read 6:42. For a while, I stayed where I was. The brass key rested in the cup holder. I drove to the county courthouse as soon as it opened. The clerk's office smelled of paper and floor wax. A young clerk named Derek brought me 3 map books and a roll of microfilm. Bellwether did not appear on any current map. I searched older records. The name appeared first on a railway survey from 1911. Bellwether had been established near a siding used for cattle and grain. By 1930, it had a school, a bank, 2 churches, a hotel, and a population of 164. Then it vanished from the records. Not declined, not dissolved, not abandoned. Vanished. A county map dated 1960 showed Bellwether clearly. The revised map from 1961 showed only grazing land. The township boundaries had been redrawn, but there was no notation explaining the change. No annexation, no fire, no flood, no municipal dissolution. I asked Derek whether records were ever removed without an order. "Not legally," he said. He examined the old plat. "That's strange. What? The section numbers don't match." He laid the maps side by side. Bellwether occupied land that the current map already counted inside 2 complete sections. "That can't happen," Derek said. I took a photograph of the maps. The image on my phone showed the 2 pages, but the name Bellwether was blurred. Everything around it was sharp. I asked about tax records. He searched the county database, then the basement archive. 2 hours later, he returned with a narrow gray box containing property cards from 1958 through 1960. The final card belonged to the Bellwether Cooperative Water Association. The owner's address was listed as Post Office Box 6. The contact person was Evelyn Reed. Reed had been my mother's maiden name. I sat down. Derek asked whether I was all right. I told him Evelyn Reed was a common name. It was not. My mother claimed she had grown up in Iowa. Her parents died before I was born, and she kept almost no photographs from childhood. The Water Association card was signed in her handwriting. I knew the long stroke in the Y and the way she crossed the T in contact. I had seen that hand on school forms, birthday cards, and her medical papers. I asked Derek to copy the entire file. The copier jammed after the first page. When he opened the machine, the paper inside was blank. He tried again. The same thing happened. I copied the cards by hand. By noon, the sky had turned white with high cloud. I drove back to the place where Bellwether Road should have begun. Nothing interrupted the fence line. I walked the shoulder, looking for tire tracks or broken grass. My own tracks ended at the edge of the pavement. The ground beyond them was untouched. I found the disputed transmission pole a mile north. It stood exactly where the survey said it did, outside the recorded easement. Attached to the back was a small metal identification plate. Bellwether Municipal Power, Line 3, 1959. The cooperative had not existed under its current name until 1972. I photographed the plate. This time the image was clear. My supervisor called while I stood there. I told him the pole belonged to a former municipal utility, and there was no landowner to sign. "There's always a landowner," he said. I drove home. My mother's things were still packed in boxes in my garage. I had been avoiding them for months. That evening, I opened every box marked office, papers, or bedroom. I found the ledger at 10:48. It was not the same ledger Alma had used, but it was close. Brown leather, cracked spine, thick cream pages. My mother's handwriting filled nearly half of it. The first page contained a single sentence. "They remain as long as one person outside remembers every name." Below that was a list. Walter Briggs, Alma Reed, Thomas Vale, 83 names in all. Beside each name, my mother had written an address, a birth year, and a short identifying detail. Kept the west gate painted. Could whistle through 2 fingers. Never missed Sunday bread. Afraid of thunder but not of snakes. The details were ordinary. That made them harder to dismiss. Near the back of the ledger, I found a map drawn in blue ink. It showed Bellwether as I had seen it, including the diner, the church, the boarding house, and the red water tower. A dotted line led south to County Road 81. On the next page, my mother had written instructions. Read the list beginning at 11:56. Do not skip a name. If a voice fails to answer, mark the line once. If the same voice fails a second night, visit before midnight. Do not allow the tower light to go dark before the final name. A separate note had been added in shaky handwriting. Claire does not know. Claire must not be asked. I read that sentence several times. At 11:56, I opened the ledger to the first page of names. I felt foolish, angry even. My mother had spent her final years repeating this list while I stood beside her, believing she was lost inside her own mind. The doctors had explained the damaged blood vessels, the confusion, the changes in speech. I had watched her forget how to use a telephone and mistake winter for summer. A hidden town did not erase any of that. Still, I read the first name aloud. Walter Briggs. The lamp above my kitchen table flickered. I read the second. Alma Reed. A soft sound came through the heating vent. Here. I closed the ledger. The clock on the microwave changed from 11:57 to 12:17. 20 minutes had passed. On the table beside the book lay the brass key from room 6. The stamped number was now 5. I did not sleep. The next morning, one line in the ledger had faded. Martha Bell, 7 Willow Street, born 1944. I could still read it, but barely. That afternoon, I called the assisted living facility. A nurse named Colleen remembered an older, formal woman who visited my mother every few months, though the woman never appeared in the visitor log. When I described Alma, Colleen went quiet. "I saw her in Evelyn's room once," she said. "They had a book between them. Your mother was crying, but she looked relieved. Her chart described the nightly list as repetitive verbal behavior and advised staff to allow it when possible." "When possible?" I asked. Colleen admitted they had interrupted her on busy nights. I looked at the faded line for Martha Bell. How many nights did she miss? I wouldn't know. For the next 6 nights, I read every name. The ritual took 19 minutes. Some nights I heard nothing. Other nights a voice came from the vent, the sink drain, the dark hallway, or the radio in the next room. Always the same word. Here. The faded line from Martha Bell darkened again on the 3rd night. I began researching Bellwether during the day. Old newspapers mentioned a harvest festival, a school basketball score, and the Red Water Tower being raised in 1959. The final article was dated October 17, 1960. State survey to correct Western County boundaries. Bellwether was not mentioned. I found the name of the survey chief, Harold Quill, and traced his papers to a university archive in Lincoln. Among his field notebooks was a folder marked Duplicate Parcel Anomaly. One note had been underlined 3 times. Town exists in field, not in sum. Another page described an attempt to enter Bellwether after midnight. Road returned us to marker 7. At 12:17, lights extinguished in sequence. At dawn, no structures observed. The final sheet was a typed memorandum addressed to the county board. Quill warned that the revised survey could not be certified because Bellwether occupied acreage that current legal descriptions already assigned elsewhere. Someone had written across the page in red pencil, "Resolved by omission." The memorandum was never filed. I believed then that I understood what had happened. The county had erased Bellwether to correct a surveying problem. The residents had been relocated or quietly compensated. My mother, perhaps as a young clerk, had preserved the list out of guilt. Her dementia had turned a bureaucratic scandal into a supernatural duty. It was a comforting explanation, because it allowed every strange thing to come from grief, stress, and suggestion. Then I found the audio reel. It was stored in the same folder, labeled October 17, 1961. The archivist transferred it to a digital file. The recording began with static and the sound of a vehicle engine. A man identified himself as Harold Quill. He stated the time as 11:52 p.m. and said he was entering Bellwether to verify the presence of structures omitted from the certified survey. For several minutes he described what he saw. Main Street, grain elevator, water tower, boarding house, residents closing curtains. At 11:56, a bell rang. A woman began reading names. The 4th name was Evelyn Reed. My mother answered, "Here." Her voice was young but unmistakable. Quill asked what the register meant. The woman replied, "It keeps us from being corrected." At midnight, the recording changed. The engine noise disappeared. Quill's breathing became loud and uneven. He said the buildings were losing their edges. He said the stars were visible through the post office. He said a girl in a red coat had taken his hand. Then my mother spoke directly beside the microphone. "Mr. Quill, you have to take the book outside." He asked why. Because someone must remember us from where the maps still work. The reel ended with Quill repeating the first three names. Walter Briggs, Alma Reed, Thomas Vale. After that, the audio contained only the bell. I listened twice. The second time, I noticed something the archivist had not. Near the end, beneath the bell, another voice was repeating a different phrase. Not a name. A warning. Do not certify. Do not certify. Do not certify. Quill died in 1988. The archive held no personal ledger. That night, while I read my mother's list, a voice failed to answer. Thomas Vale, I said. Silence. I marked the line once, as instructed. The following night there was still no answer. At 11:40 I drove west. Bellwether Road appeared on my navigation screen before I reached County Road 81. The green population sign now read 82. The town looked dimmer than before. Several street lamps were out. The diner windows were dark. The red tower light blinked irregularly. Alma waited on the boarding house porch. You stopped reading, she said. For one night. One night is long here. Who is Thomas Vale? My brother. Why didn't he answer? His house is gone. She led me 2 blocks east to an empty lot. The foundations of a house remained, but they were filled with pale grass. A mailbox leaned beside the curb. Thomas Vale, 14 Ash Street. What happened to him? He was missed twice. I read his name. After the second night? Yes. Then perhaps he is still near. Alma opened the mailbox. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. It was a page from my mother's ledger. On it, in handwriting that looked like mine, was a new list of names. The first line read Claire Mercer, 2119 Laurel Avenue, my home address. I backed away. Alma did not touch me. What does that mean? It means the book has begun making room. For what? For what it costs. I told her I wanted the truth without riddles. She looked toward the water tower. The town was not erased in 1961, she said. It was divided. The survey said the land belonged to 2 descriptions at once. For 11 months we received 2 tax bills, 2 sets of election notices, 2 weather reports. Then people began seeing 2 versions of the same road. She spoke calmly, as though recounting a difficult winter. One road led here, the other led through empty land. At midnight, the 2 versions tried to become one. Buildings disappeared for minutes at a time. People woke in fields. A child opened her bedroom door and found a pasture on the other side. Why the ledger? Names were the only things that stayed consistent. Harold wrote them down. Evelyn took the book when he became ill. My mother was 17. She was also brave. She left. She had to. Someone outside must hold the complete list. Why didn't she tell me? Because remembering us changes the person who carries the names. I looked at the page in the mailbox. What changes? First, records, then habits, then memory. The outside world begins to make space for the town by removing space from the keeper. I thought of the motel key changing from 6 to 5. I thought of the missing time at my kitchen table. Did that happen to my mother? Yes. She had dementia. Yes. Was it caused by this? Alma's face tightened. Not all suffering has one cause, but the list took more than it should have. I wanted to be angry at her. Instead, I felt the old anger I had carried from the assisted living facility, the anger that had nowhere proper to go. At the doctors, at my mother, at myself, at every evening when I had watched the minute hand approach midnight and wished I were anywhere else. Why did she keep doing it? Because people were still answering. A porch light across the street went out. The house behind it became slightly transparent. Alma took the page from the mailbox. Thomas was tired, she said. He may have chosen not to answer. Can people choose? Some can. Can the whole town choose? She did not answer. We returned to the boarding house before the bell. In the parlor, 8 people waited. The man from the diner was there, along with the woman who had served coffee. A girl in a red coat stood beside the cold fireplace. She looked about 12. I recognized her from Harold Quill's recording, though the reel had been made more than 60 years earlier. Alma placed the ledger on the desk. My mother's name remained near the end. "Where is she?" I asked. "No one knows exactly where we go after 12:17, Alma said. "Sometimes people return, sometimes they do not. Evelyn came back during her last year." "To this house?" "To room 6. "Is she here now?" Alma shook her head. "She stopped answering 3 nights before you arrived." I stared at the brass key hanging on its hook. Room 6. The number on my key had changed because rooms were being removed. "What do you want me to do?" The man from the diner spoke. "Keep reading." The woman beside him said, "Let it end." No one reacted with surprise. The room divided quietly, not by sides but by lowered eyes and folded hands. Some wanted Bellwether preserved. Others had lived through 60 years of nights that never led into mornings. The town continued because someone outside carried every name, and no one had asked whether being remembered was the same as being alive. The girl in the red coat came closer. "My name is June Bell," she said. "My mother was Martha." The faded line. "Did she come back?" "No. I'm sorry." June considered this. "Your mother always said that." The bell began to ring. It was 11:56. Alma opened the ledger. "We have to decide," I said. "We decide every night," she replied. "No, you repeat every night. That isn't the same thing." The first wall lamp dimmed. I took the ledger from her. The room became silent. I asked each person to answer one question. I asked whether they wanted their name read tomorrow night. Alma said yes. The man from the diner said yes. The woman beside him said no. June said, "Not if my mother isn't there." One by one they answered. Outside, people came onto porches and stood in the dark. I asked the question from the boarding house steps while the bell continued. Some called yes, some called no, some did not answer. At 11:59, the red tower light failed. The edges of Main Street softened. I opened the ledger to the first page and read only the names of those who had said yes. With every omission, something disappeared. The barber pole faded. A row of mailboxes became grass. The diner sign lost one letter at a time. When I passed Thomas Vale's name without reading it, the empty lot on Ash Street became open field. When I reached Martha Bell, June took my hand. I did not read the name. The girl's red coat became pale, then colorless. She looked toward the dark street as if someone had called her from far away. "Thank you," she said. Then she was gone. I continued. At my mother's name, I stopped. Evelyn Mercer. The letters were darker than the rest. For years, I had believed her final clear sentence was about the red water tower. Standing there, I understood that it had not been a warning for me. It had been an apology. She knew the tower would go dark. She knew the list would pass to me. She knew she had no strength left to prevent it. I placed my finger beneath her name. I did not read it. A door closed upstairs. Not loudly, just once. At 12:17, Bellwether disappeared. This time I remained awake. The boarding house, the street, and the people who had chosen to stay were drawn away from me without movement. There was no wind, no flash. The world simply became less certain around them until the only solid things were the ledger in my hands and the brass key in my pocket. Then I was standing alone in the grass beside my truck. The sky was full of stars. In the distance, the disputed transmission pole leaned against the dark. The ledger contained 31 names. 52 had vanished from the pages. I drove home before dawn. For a while, I believed I had solved the problem. 31 names were manageable. The ritual took less than 10 minutes. I read them every night. Each voice answered. The tower remained lit until the final name. Bellwether continued to appear, though never in the same place twice. Sometimes Bellwether Road surfaced near County 81. Sometimes it appeared 60 miles north. Once, in January, I saw the red tower beyond a frozen lake in Minnesota while traveling for work. I never entered again. I filed copies of the old survey and Harold Quill's memorandum with the county. The documents were accepted, stamped, and scanned. Within a week, every copy had become blank. My photograph of the municipal power plate still exists, but the cooperative's legal department says the pole belongs to no known system. Crews will not remove it. The work order disappears whenever they schedule the job. The cost Alma described began slowly. My grocery store loyalty account no longer recognized my phone number. Then my dentist said I had never been a patient. A traffic camera recorded my truck but not the driver. At work, completed reports vanished from the server unless I signed them with one of Bellwether's names. I resigned. Last year, I tried to stop reading. At 11:56, I closed the ledger and placed it in a metal lockbox. At midnight, my house lost electricity. At 12:05, the framed photograph of my mother disappeared from the wall. At 12:09, I could no longer remember the sound of her laugh. I opened the box at 12:11 and began the list. The photograph returned before dawn. The laugh did not. I have accepted that I will not outlive the duty in any ordinary sense. The keeper is not consumed all at once. The outside world simply grows less certain that you belong to it. My address still appears on the county parcel map, though the owner field is blank. My former co-workers remember a right-of-way agent who handled the Bellwether assignment, but none of them can agree on my name. I write it at the top of every page now. Claire Mercer. I keep the brass motel key beside the ledger. For 6 years, the stamped number decreased as rooms disappeared. 6 became 5. 5 became 4. Then 3. Last October, after I read the remaining names, the number changed in the other direction. It became 7. The next morning, a new line appeared at the bottom of the ledger. Claire Mercer, Room 7, Vale House. I have not seen Bellwether since. But every night after I read the 31 names, a final voice answers from somewhere inside my house. It sounds like me. It says, "Here." The first time I saw Cinder Wells, Nevada, the town clock was running 11 minutes fast. That night, however, the clock above the Cinder Wells bus depot showed 12:07, while every clock on my coach showed 11:56. 3 minutes later, the entire town disappeared. I was 38 then, driving the Reno to Ely night route for Silver State Transit. The company was small enough that dispatch knew every driver's habits, and large enough to blame us when those habits cost money. I had a reputation for arriving early. It was not pride. Not exactly. 7 years before Cinder Wells, I had passed a closed roadside stop outside Austin during a February storm. A young woman had been standing beneath the old shelter with one hand raised. The stop had been removed from our route. The road was icing, and I already had 43 passengers aboard. I told myself she might be waiting for someone else. At the next town, I called the sheriff. By the time a deputy reached the shelter, no one was there. No missing person report matched her. No one at the nearby ranches knew who she might have been. Dispatch told me I had followed policy. For years afterward, I watched every shoulder, every turnout, and every dark shelter, as if punctuality could repair what I had done. On the night I found Cinder Wells, I had 14 passengers aboard and a relief driver waiting in Ely. The forecast called for freezing rain over Robinson Summit, but the sky was clear when we left Reno. Most of the passengers slept before Fernley. A college student watched a movie without headphones until an older man complained. A woman in a green coat held a florist's box on her lap. 2 miners in the rear spoke quietly about a shutdown near Eureka. The trouble began east of Austin. A tanker had overturned on US 50, blocking both lanes. State police diverted traffic onto an older county road that looped south through open desert before returning to the highway. The trooper at the barricade leaned toward my window and said, "Stay on the blacktop. Don't follow your navigation if it sends you west." "Why west?" "Mining roads. You'll lose maybe 40 minutes. I called dispatch. My supervisor, Dana, told me to take the detour and update her after I rejoined the highway. The county road ran between low hills darkened by old burns. There were no houses, no power lines, and no other vehicles. After 20 miles, the pavement became patched and rough. The coach rattled hard enough to wake the people near the front. At 11:23, the navigation system announced a left turn. There was no intersection. At 11:31, it announced the same turn again. This time, a road appeared. It was a narrow 2-lane strip marked by faded white lines. A weathered sign stood beside it. Cinder Wells, 9 miles. The road continued straight ahead, but an orange barrier blocked it from shoulder to shoulder. A handwritten notice had been tied to the center. "Bridge out." I stopped the coach. One of the miners came forward. "What's the delay?" "Bridge closure. Take the town road. I don't have it on the route map." He looked through the windshield. "Sign says 9 miles. That doesn't mean it connects." My radio gave only static. My phone had 1 bar, then none. I walked outside with a flashlight. The air smelled of cold dust and sage. The barrier looked official from a distance, but up close, I saw that it had no county markings. The handwritten notice was made from the back of a grocery carton. I shone the light along the road beyond it. 30 feet ahead, the pavement had collapsed into a dry wash. There was no bridge. The wash had not held water for years. I returned to the coach and chose the road to Cinder Wells. The first streetlights appeared at 11:48. They were mounted on short iron poles and cast weak amber circles across the road. The town sat inside a shallow basin surrounded by black hills. It was larger than I expected. There was a gas station, a grocery, a row of single-story houses, a motel, and a small downtown built around a square. At the far end stood a white bus depot with 3 bays. Every business was open. A sign at the edge of town read Population 312. Below it was a second sign, All departures before midnight. I eased the coach toward the depot. The station clock showed 12:04. My dashboard showed 11:53. A man in a brown uniform stepped onto the platform and waved me into Bay 2. I opened the door. He climbed aboard before I could speak. "You're late," he said. "This isn't a scheduled stop. It is tonight. I need the road back to US 50. You won't reach it before the turn." "What turn?" He looked at the station clock. "You have 6 minutes." I asked whether there was a route through town. He pointed past the depot toward a road climbing the eastern hill. "Straight through, second right after the water tank. Don't stop once you start up the grade." "Why?" "Because the road changes when the clock catches up." I should have left immediately. Instead, I noticed a line of people waiting beneath the depot awning. There were 9 of them. Each carried a suitcase or a paper parcel. A young man held a caged canary. An elderly woman wore a dark blue traveling suit. A boy of perhaps 10 stood beside a red bicycle. The station master said, "You have room." "They don't have tickets." "They do." He handed me a stack of narrow paper slips. The printing was old-fashioned. Cinder Wells appeared at the top, followed by a destination and a fare of $1.10. Every ticket listed a different town: Ely, Eureka, Fallon, Carson City, Reno. The bottom line on each ticket was blank. "Passenger name?" I asked. "Driver completes it. I'm not boarding anyone without authorization. Then leave now." I looked at my clock. 11:55. "Why aren't they getting on?" she asked. "We're leaving." The station master did not move. "Close the door," I told him. He stepped onto the pavement. The boy with the bicycle looked directly at me. For a moment, he reminded me of the young woman at the roadside shelter years earlier. Not in appearance, in stillness. Both had stood as if they had already been waiting much longer than any driver could understand. I closed the door. The depot clock moved to 12:10. My dashboard remained at 11:56. I pulled out of the bay. The eastern road was easy to find. I passed the water tank and took the second right. The pavement began climbing between low stone walls. Behind us, the town bell rang once. At the first bend, every streetlight went out. At the second, the buildings disappeared from my mirrors. Not darkened, disappeared. The mirrors reflected only the road behind us, descending into an empty basin. The coach lights flickered. The engine lost power for half a second, then recovered. I kept climbing. At the top of the grade, the road ended at a chain-link gate. Beyond it lay open desert. I stopped. The company clock changed to 12:17. Every passenger's phone lit at once. I looked in the mirror. There were 15 passengers. The boy from the depot sat in the first row on the right. His red bicycle was folded somehow into the luggage rack above him, though it was too large to fit. He held a punched ticket in both hands. The name on it was mine. I pulled the parking brake. No one else seemed surprised to see him. The woman in the green coat leaned across the aisle. "Are you traveling alone?" The boy nodded. "What's your name?" He looked at me. "Caleb." I asked how he had boarded. The woman frowned. "He got on at Austin." "No, he didn't." One of the miners opened his eyes. "Kid's been there the whole trip." I checked the passenger count on my manifest. 14. I counted the seats again. 15 people. The boy's ticket read, Claire Danner, Cinder Wells to Ely. My name is not Claire, it is Marlene Danner. Claire had been my older sister. She died when I was 19. I took the ticket from the boy. "Who wrote this?" "You did." "I didn't." "You will." His voice was calm, almost tired. I asked what Cinder Wells was. The coach radio crackled before he could answer. Dana's voice came through. "Marlene, confirm your location." I gave her the mile marker from the old county road. There was a pause. "You're on US 50, she said. "No, I'm south of the highway. Our tracker shows you eastbound near Hickison Summit." "That's impossible. You're 47 minutes late. Keep moving if the vehicle is safe." I looked through the windshield. The chain-link gate was gone. The road continued down the eastern slope toward the highway. I drove. No one spoke for several miles. I asked his age. 10. "What year were you born?" He thought about it. "Depends where we stop." I did not ask again. We reached Ely at 1:32. The relief driver met us at the depot, irritated but awake. I told him there was an extra passenger and asked him to wait while I contacted the sheriff. When I turned back, Caleb's seat was empty. The red bicycle remained in the luggage rack. No one remembered him. The woman in the green coat insisted the seat had been empty from Reno. The miners laughed when I described a boy at Cinder Wells. The college student said we had never entered a town. I checked the ticket. It was still in my pocket. The printed destination had changed. Cinder Wells to Reno. The name line was blank. I reported the detour to Dana. She searched the state road database while I stood beside the coach. "There's no Cinder Wells," she said. "There was a depot. Not on any active or historic route I can find. Check old mining towns." I did. She sounded concerned rather than doubtful, which was worse. "Get some sleep, we'll review the camera footage tomorrow." Every coach carried interior and forward-facing cameras. The recordings showed the barrier, the turnoff, and the road into the basin. At the moment the first streetlight should have appeared, the image froze. For 11 minutes, the video displayed a single frame of empty road. Then it resumed at the top of the eastern grade. The footage showed 14 passengers. Caleb did not appear. The bicycle did. Dana called maintenance. The mechanic removed it from the rack and found a metal registration plate beneath the seat. Cinder Wells Mercantile, 1948. We placed the bicycle in a locked storage room. The next morning, it was gone. A wet tire mark ran across the concrete floor and ended at the wall. The company classified the incident as a camera malfunction and an unauthorized object left aboard by an unknown passenger. Dana advised me not to discuss the town with customers. For 3 weeks, nothing else happened. Then a paper ticket appeared in my cash box. Silver State Transit had used electronic tickets for years. The old Cinder Wells ticket lay beneath a roll of quarters. The destination was Carson City. The name line read Harold Voss. I did not know anyone by that name. That evening, an elderly passenger boarded in Fallon and handed me his phone to scan. His account would not load, so I asked for identification. Harold Voss. I nearly dropped his license. He was 76, with white hair and a careful way of moving. His destination was Carson City. I asked whether he had ever heard of Cinder Wells. He looked past me into the coach. I hoped I'd imagined it. I let him ride without charging the fare. After we cleared town, he moved to the front seat. He told me he had seen Cinder Wells in 1974 while driving a produce truck from Tonopah. A dust storm forced him onto a county road after dark. He arrived at 11:40. The depot was crowded. Back then, they tried to board 27 people, he said. What happened? I refused. Did someone appear in your truck afterward? He nodded. A woman named Ruth. My wife remembered her as a hitchhiker we picked up outside Mina, but I was alone that night. What happened to her? She stayed with us for 9 years. I waited. Harold looked at his hands. She had papers, social security number, school records. Everything appeared a few weeks after she did. We helped her get work at a laundry. She became our daughter's godmother. What do you mean, she stayed 9 years? One morning, nobody remembered her but me. He took a folded photograph from his wallet. Her room was gone, he said. Not empty, gone. The outside wall moved inward. My wife said the house had always had 2 bedrooms. Why did you remember? I carried her ticket. He showed me a narrow paper slip worn almost transparent at the folds. Cinder Wells to Tonopah. The name line said Harold Voss. It had your name, not hers. That's how the town travels. I thought of Caleb. Where did Ruth go? Back, I believe. Can people leave permanently? Harold gave a tired smile. If they could, you wouldn't have met me. He explained what he knew. Cinder Wells had been a silver and borax town. The mine closed in 1952. State records showed the population dispersing over the next decade. Harold had found tax notices, school yearbooks, and newspaper reports that proved the town existed until at least 1968. Then a new highway bypass opened. On the night traffic shifted to the new road, Cinder Wells disappeared. Not from one place, from every place. Its streets, buildings, residents, and records ceased to occupy a fixed location after midnight. Before midnight, the town appeared along roads traveled by vehicles that could carry passengers. After midnight, it vanished and moved with whichever person held a completed ticket. A town can't move with a person, I said. Then call it memory. Call it pressure. Call it a mistake in time. It doesn't care what we name it. Why did Caleb appear on my bus? Because his ticket had your sister's name. My name was not on it. Harold's expression changed. What name? Claire Danner. He sat back. That was not the passenger name. It was on the line. That line belongs to the replacement. I asked what he meant. Harold looked toward the sleeping passengers behind us. Cinder Wells cannot add a resident to the outside world. The numbers balance. When someone leaves, the town chooses a name already missing from the driver's life. For a while, the passenger occupies that absence. I felt cold despite the heat from the dashboard. My sister died. How old was she? 24. How long ago? 19 years. Did the boy remind you of her? No. That isn't necessary. The town doesn't replace the person. It replaces the space left behind. I told him Caleb had vanished in Ely. Harold shook his head. He didn't vanish. He failed to take hold. Why? Maybe you did not complete the ticket. The ticket had been punched, but I had not written the name. What happens if I do? Someone from Cinder Wells becomes real outside for a time. And the person whose name is written? Harold folded his photograph. You remember them less. I pulled into Carson City before midnight. Harold refused to leave the coach until I promised not to return to Cinder Wells. You think you can help them? He said. That is how it begins. You carry one, then another. Each time the town gives them a place built from someone you already lost. Eventually, you cannot remember what was taken. Why did you carry Ruth? She said she had a daughter outside. Did she? I don't know anymore. He stepped down to the pavement. Before the door closed, he said, "Burn the tickets." I tried. The next Cinder Wells ticket appeared 4 days later. I held it over my kitchen sink and lit one corner. The flame burned blue for a second, then went out. The paper remained unmarked. The name line read Claire Danner. The destination was Austin. I drove to the old roadside shelter on my day off. Near the ditch, I found a brass bicycle bell. It rang when I picked it up. From somewhere beyond the low hills, a boy answered, "Here." I dropped it. I woke at 12:17. The ticket lay on my nightstand. Austin had changed to Cinder Wells. I began searching route archives. Cinder Wells appeared on one route. Route 12, Reno to Pioche, operated by Great Basin Coach Lines. The stop was scheduled for 11:49 p.m. Departure was listed as 12:10 a.m. That made no sense. A route could not leave after the town disappeared. Beside the time, someone had stamped a warning in red ink. Driver must complete all names before departure. After the bypass opened, the records changed. Passenger names were replaced by names of people connected to the driver. Each manifest listed one more passenger leaving Cinder Wells than had boarded the bus before it. I found Harold Voss's run from 1974. His manifest named Ruth Voss, not Harold. I called Harold. The number was disconnected. Directory assistants found no listing. Public records showed Harold Voss had died in 1991. I had spoken with him 3 days earlier. I called Dana and asked her to pull the original video again. The file was corrupted. "Take a few days off," she said. "You sound exhausted." I told her about Harold, the manifests, and the impossible passenger. There was a long silence. Then she said, "Do you remember Gordon Pike?" I did. Gordon had driven for the company before retiring. He used to carry peppermints in his shirt pocket and stop for any person standing near the road, whether the stop was official or not. He disappeared in 2004, Dana said. I thought he moved to Idaho. So did I. She emailed me an old disciplinary report. Gordon had been written up for making an unauthorized stop at Cinder Wells. His statement consisted of one sentence. I left with 32 passengers and arrived with 31, but the empty seat had my name on it. Dana found his final route sheet. Across the bottom, Gordon had written a list of 6 names. The last was Dana's mother. Her mother died the following month. Did Gordon know her? I asked. No. Did he ever carry someone who took her place? I don't know. Dana's voice became quiet. My father married a woman named Ellen 6 months after Mom died. I remember hating her. I remember her living with us for 9 years. What happened to her? I can't find a single photograph. Dad says he never remarried. Do you still remember Ellen? Yes. Then you had her ticket. Dana opened a drawer while we were on the phone. I heard paper moving. Oh, she said. She had kept an old transit ticket in a jewelry box since childhood. The destination was Cinder Wells. The name was Dana Pike. Pike? I asked. That wasn't my last name. Gordon had not been a family friend. He had been her father. The town had replaced the memory of him with another man. Dana began crying without making a sound. We understood then that Cinder Wells did not only occupy the empty spaces left by the dead, it could move those spaces. It could take a living person's place in memory and use the abandoned identity to anchor one of its residents outside. The more tickets completed, the more stable the town became. The less stable everyone else became. I asked Dana to shut down the route until we knew more. She agreed. The next night, the tanker accident disappeared from state records. The county road returned to normal. Our company tracker showed no detour. At 11:40, every phone in the dispatch office rang. Dana answered one. A child said, "Bay 2 is waiting." She canceled all eastbound service. At midnight, the lights in the depot went out. When they returned, our route board displayed a new stop between Austin and Eureka, Cinder Wells. Departure 12:10. The name remained for 11 minutes. The following evening, passengers began arriving with printed tickets to the town. None remembered buying them. The company could not explain the reservations, but the payments were real. Dana refunded every one. At 11:31, a Silver State coach started by itself in the locked yard. Its destination sign read, Cinder Wells. We removed the battery. The engine continued running. I knew the town was no longer waiting for us to find it. It was coming closer. Dana and I studied the old manifests through the night. The final regular driver on Route 12 had been a woman named Lillian Cross. Her personnel file included a handwritten account dated the night the bypass opened. According to Lillian, Cinder Wells had not vanished because traffic stopped. The town council had chosen to make it vanish. The mine was closed. Water was failing. Younger families were leaving. The new highway would strand the remaining residents miles from fuel, medicine, and work. A man named Everett Shaw offered a solution. Shaw owned the bus depot and held the mail contract. He had noticed that passengers were remembered in towns they had only passed through. Their names entered manifests, receipts, and conversations. A traveler left a thin trail of proof behind them. He believed a whole town could survive by becoming part of that trail. At midnight on the first night of the bypass, every resident bought a ticket. The drivers completed the names. The town moved. Lillian's final paragraph was underlined. Everett promised no one would be taken. He was wrong. A place cannot be carried without weight. Beneath the statement was a list of station masters. The current station master's name was Everett Shaw. He had looked 50 years old. Dana found one more document, a maintenance invoice for Bay 2 dated the following week. Customer complaint. Depot clock gains 11 minutes. Repair note. Clock is correct. Town is late. At 11:15, I told Dana I was taking the empty coach east. She refused. Then she looked at the ticket in her jewelry box. "We both go," she said. We removed the fare box and disabled the passenger Wi-Fi. Dana brought the old manifests, Lillian Cross's statement, and a road flare. I carried the blank Cinder Wells tickets that had appeared over the previous weeks. There were 32. We drove without company markings on the destination sign. The road appeared outside Austin at 11:28. This time, no barrier forced us to turn. The entrance sign read population 344, 32 more than before. Cinder Wells had been adding people. The streets were crowded. Some residents wore modern clothes. Others looked as though they had stepped out of old photographs. I recognized Danielle Kersey near the grocery store, still carrying the florist's box. Caleb waited beside Bay 2. The station master stood behind him. "You came back," Everett said. "You knew I would. The drivers always do." Dana stepped down from the coach. Everett looked at her and removed his hat. "Miss Pike, my name is Dana Ruiz." "Not first!" She held up the ticket from her jewelry box. "What did you do to my father?" Everett glanced toward the depot clock. 12:03. My watch showed 11:52. "Inside," he said. "We have little time." The waiting room was filled with people. 32 suitcases stood in a line beneath the windows. On the wall hung a large route map. Red threads extended from Cinder Wells to dozens of cities. At the end of each thread was a name. Some were crossed out. Some had 2 names written over each other. I found Claire Danner. A red thread ran from her name to Caleb. Dana found Gordon Pike connected to a woman named Ellen. The town had charted every replacement. Everett called it the exchange board. "Passenger leaves," he said. "Absence enters. We match the shape." "A person is not a shape," Dana said. "Memory disagrees." I asked why Caleb had failed to remain outside. "You left the name blank. What would have happened if I wrote Claire? You would have remembered less of her. Others would remember Caleb more. Would my sister disappear from records? She is already absent." I stepped close enough to see the scratches around Everett's badge. "You have been doing this for nearly 60 years. I have been keeping 300 people from becoming nothing. You have been taking lives." "No, we take vacancies." Dana struck the exchange board with her palm. "My father was alive." Everett's expression did not change. Gordon gave more than instructed. Some drivers do. The bell rang once outside. The clock showed 12:07. Everett opened a drawer and removed a fresh manifest. 32 names were printed on it. The first was Claire Danner. The second was Gordon Pike. The remaining names belonged to people I did not know. "You complete the manifest," he said. "The passengers leave. Cinder Wells settles near the new route. No more wandering. No more midnight loss. And the names? Those absences are already open. They are people. They are memories of people. That is different." Caleb stood near the doorway. I asked him whether he wanted to leave. He looked at the red bicycle beside him. "I want to arrive somewhere." "That isn't what I asked." He considered for a long moment. "I don't know what wanting feels like outside." Dana asked what would happen if we drove away empty. Everett's eyes moved to the clock. "The town will follow." "What if there is no driver?" "There is always a driver." The lights flickered. Through the windows, buildings at the edge of town began to fade. I understood the false choice he had given us. Carry the passengers and sacrifice 32 identities, or refuse and allow Cinder Wells to attach itself to our route, taking names gradually. But the town's rule depended on completed tickets. Drivers created the exchange. Without a destination and a name, the residents could not anchor outside. I looked at the old map, the red threads, and the depot clock gaining 11 minutes. The town was not disappearing after midnight. It was departing. Every night, for decades, Cinder Wells had treated the outside world as a station and its memories as available seats. I asked Everett one final question. "Who completed your ticket?" For the first time, he looked uncertain. Dana searched the board. No thread led from his name. Everett Shaw had never left. He had never risked the exchange himself. The bell rang again. I took the manifest from his hand and tore it down the center. The paper resisted, then split with a sound like dry cloth. Every light in the depot went out. People began moving toward the coach. Not running, they approached with suitcases, parcels, cages, and boxes. Their faces held no anger, only urgency. Everett shouted for me to open Bay 2. I climbed onto the coach and started the engine. Dana stood in the doorway. "What are you doing?" "Giving them a departure." "With no tickets?" "With no route." I changed the destination sign to out of service. Then I removed the route card entirely. The bell rang a third time. The depot clock reached 12:10. My watch showed 11:59. I opened both doors. People boarded. Not 32. Hundreds. They filled the aisle, the steps, the luggage bays, and the spaces between seats. Some passed through one another like overlapping reflections. Others carried children or framed photographs. The air inside the coach smelled of dust, perfume, machine oil, bread, rain, and old wool. Caleb sat behind me with the bicycle across his knees. Everett remained on the platform. "You cannot carry a town without an exchange," he said. "I'm not carrying it." I released the brake. "I'm ending the route." We pulled away as midnight reached my watch. Cinder Wells vanished behind us. The coach did not become heavier. It became quieter. In the mirror, the passengers faded one by one. Some closed their eyes. Some looked through the windows. A few smiled. Dana stood beside me, gripping the rail. The eastern road climbed toward the hills. At the first bend, the grocery disappeared. At the second, the motel. At the third, the depot clock stopped. The road ended at the familiar chain-link gate. Beyond it lay open desert. I kept driving. The gate passed through the coach like smoke. The pavement vanished beneath us. For 11 minutes, we crossed darkness with no road, no horizon, and no sound from the tires. The headlights illuminated nothing. Caleb leaned toward the aisle. "Where are we going?" "I don't know." "Is that allowed?" "No." He smiled. The coach clock changed to 12:17. The desert returned. We were parked on the shoulder of US 50 beneath the old shelter outside Austin. The engine was off. The coach was empty except for Dana and me. On the first seat lay the red bicycle bell. The shelter outside was not empty. A young woman stood beneath it with one hand raised. She wore a thin winter coat. Snow moved across the road in pale lines. I recognized her. Not because I had seen her face clearly 7 years earlier. Because I remembered, all at once, that her name was Lacey Moran. She had been 23, traveling to meet her father in Tonopah. Her car had broken down near Cold Springs. She waited at the decommissioned stop because an old schedule still listed it. I remembered the sheriff finding her 2 miles from the highway with frostbite and a broken ankle. I remembered visiting her in the hospital. I remembered apologizing. None of those memories had existed before. The town had not only taken absences, it had stored them. Lacey opened the coach door from outside, though I had not unlocked it. "You stopped this time," she said. "What happened to you?" "You kept driving." "I know." "No," she said. "You remember the version they left you." Behind her, dawn began brightening the road. "What is the true version?" She stepped back from the door. "You stopped." The shelter, the snow, and Lacey faded with the dark. Dana touched my shoulder. The highway was dry, the sky was clear. In the luggage rack above the first row, the red bicycle rested on its side. We drove to Reno. Cinder Wells no longer appeared on the route board. The unauthorized tickets vanished. Passengers stopped calling dispatch. Gordon Pike returned to Dana's family photographs, though his face was blurred in most of them. Her father remembered him as a cousin. Dana remembered him as both father and stranger. Harold Voss's obituary changed. He died only 6 weeks after I met him, at the age of 76. His wallet was found with a faded bus ticket inside. I searched for Lacey Moran. A woman by that name lived in Tonopah. She was 30, worked at a dental office, and had a slight limp from an old injury. I called once and listened while she said hello. I did not speak. She had a life. Whatever I remembered, I would not ask her to carry it. Silver State Transit retired the coach. Mechanics found no damage, but the odometer had gained 312 miles overnight. 1 mile for every resident of Cinder Wells when I first arrived. The town itself has not appeared again, not on our route. For several years, I believed the people aboard that final departure had been released. I imagined them becoming what all forgotten places eventually become. Stories without coordinates, names without addresses, dust settling where rooms once stood. Then the tickets began arriving in other states. A driver in New Mexico found one beneath his fare box. A school bus in Oregon carried a boy with a red bicycle for 11 minutes. A woman driving an airport shuttle outside Denver reported passing a town where every clock showed 12:07. The tickets no longer list Cinder Wells as the origin. They list different towns, different names, different roads. But the departure time is always 12:10. Last winter, I received one in the mail. There was no return address. The destination line was blank. The passenger name was Marlene Danner. At the bottom, in small print, someone had added a new instruction. Driver must arrive before midnight. I keep the ticket in my glove compartment. I no longer drive buses. Still, whenever I travel at night, I watch the roadside for a waiting shelter. And when I see someone standing there, I stop. The town of Grayglass, Maine disappears at 12:17 every night. I do not mean the lights go out or the fog becomes too thick to see the houses. The water closes over the place without moving. The coastline becomes an unbroken curve, and boats pass through the coordinates where Main Street should be. From inside the town, you can still see the mainland lights. You can even call the Coast Guard. They will hear your voice clearly. They simply will not hear the town behind you. I first learned that in November of 2018, while standing beneath a foghorn that was broadcasting a conversation I had erased 15 years earlier. I was 46 then, a field engineer for North Atlantic Signal Systems. We maintained fog signals, harbor beacons, emergency sirens, and the older municipal radio equipment that small coastal towns could not afford to replace all at once. Grayglass was supposed to be a 2-day service call. The town had reported intermittent failure in its harbor warning horn. According to the work order, the horn sounded normally before sunset, then began producing speech after 11:40 at night. Residents described overlapping voices, fragments of weather reports, and what one caller called a room full of people breathing. Our dispatcher assumed radio interference. The equipment was old enough to pick up almost anything. Grayglass stood on a low island 8 miles off the Maine coast. A stone causeway connected it to the mainland at low tide, but most visitors used the ferry from Dyer Point. The town had fewer than 400 permanent residents, one small school, a lobster cooperative, a general store, and a white lighthouse built on the eastern ledge. I had never heard of it. That did not concern me at first. Maine contains dozens of islands and villages known mainly to mail carriers, fishermen, and the people who leave them. What concerned me was the name written beneath the service request. Ruth Calder, Harbor Master. I had seen that name before. 15 years earlier, when I worked as a civilian audio analyst for the Coast Guard, Ruth Calder had called every week for 4 months, asking about a distress recording from the fishing vessel Mercy Bell. The vessel carried 3 men. 2 were rescued after dawn. The third, a deckhand named Julian Say, died before help reached them. I had processed the final radio transmission. The original recording contained a low mechanical pulse, irregular bell tones, and a deep hum beneath the captain's voice. I classified those sounds as interference and removed them so the spoken coordinates could be understood. The cleaned coordinates placed the Mercy Bell 4 miles south of the search area where it was eventually found. There was an inquiry. I testified that the raw file had been degraded by atmospheric noise. I did not say that the strange background sounds had formed a repeating pattern. I did not say I had noticed the pattern before I filtered it out. The official conclusion blamed faulty navigation equipment aboard the vessel. I left government work 2 years later. Ruth Calder never contacted me again. When I saw her name on the Grayglass work order, I considered sending another engineer. Then I told myself 15 years was long enough to stop arranging my life around one decision. The ferry left Dyer Point at 3 in the afternoon under a low ceiling of cloud. It carried my service van, a fuel truck, 2 pallets of groceries, and 11 passengers. The crossing took 50 minutes. The most unusual feature was the sound. I noticed it before the ferry docked. Every house seemed to contain something humming, ticking, ringing, or turning. Radios played behind open windows. Wind chimes moved beneath porches despite the still air. A washing machine thumped in a building near the pier. Somewhere uphill, a table saw ran in short bursts. The town was not loud. It was layered. The separate sounds rested over one another without competing, like the ordinary noise of a house heard from another room. Ruth Calder waited beside the ferry office. She was 61, tall and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and a red wool cap pulled low over her ears. She wore a faded harbor jacket with a radio clipped to the chest. She looked at my company logo, then at my face. "You changed your last name," she said. I had married and divorced during the years since the Mercy Bell inquiry. Ortiz was my former husband's name. I had kept it because changing professional records again seemed more trouble than the marriage had been. "You remember me," I said. "I remember voices." The ferry workers lowered the ramp. Ruth stepped aside. "We have 3 hours before the tide covers the causeway," she said. "After that, your van stays until morning. My reservation is for 2 nights." "I know." She did not mention the Mercy Bell. I followed her truck uphill through town. Grayglass had no traffic light and very little pavement. The main road passed the cooperative, post office, church, school, and a municipal building that also housed the fire department. Old speakers were mounted on utility poles at each intersection. Most coastal towns had removed systems like that decades earlier. Grayglass had maintained its network with mismatched horns and black cable looped beneath the power lines. At the center of town stood a small tower made from rust-colored steel. A circular siren rested on top. It was not connected to the harbor warning horn listed on my work order. "What is that used for?" I asked Ruth over the radio. "Time signal." "For the fishermen?" "For everyone." We continued toward the lighthouse. The signal building stood on the ledge below it. A square concrete structure with a rusted steel door. 2 large trumpet horns faced the ocean. A newer antenna mast rose from the roof. Inside, I found the kind of equipment history creates when no one is given enough money to begin again. An analog tone generator from the 1970s shared a rack with a digital controller installed in 2011. Copper telephone lines entered through the east wall. A marine radio receiver had been wired into a public address amplifier. 3 cassette decks sat above a modern network switch. Nothing matched the diagram my office had sent. The room vibrated with a low hum. I set my tool case on a table. "Has anyone modified this recently?" "A contractor replaced the controller in September." "Which contractor?" "He came from Portland. Young man, very clean shoes." "That narrows it down." Ruth did not smile. "He said the old system was full of noise. He installed suppression software." I looked at the digital controller. A small green indicator read, "Adaptive gate active." "That may be your problem." "Why?" "A noise gate removes low-level sound when it falls below a set threshold. It can clip words or open at the wrong time. With equipment this old, it might also create feedback." "Can you remove it?" "Yes." "When?" "I need to test the system first." "Before midnight." The way she said it made me look at her. "What happens at midnight?" "At 12:17. "What happens then?" "You came to repair the horn." I need to understand operating conditions. Ruth turned toward the open door. From the ledge, we could see most of Grayglass. Smoke rose from chimneys. The ferry was already pulling away from the pier. The horn carries the town, she said. Carries it where? Outside. I waited. She did not explain. I began with the signal path. The harbor microphone fed an amplifier, which split into 3 outputs. One drove the foghorns. One connected to the town speaker network. The third went to a marine transmitter assigned to an obsolete working frequency. The microphone was mounted outdoors, beneath the lighthouse gallery. It captured wind, waves, gulls, engine noise, bells, and anything spoken nearby. I played the live feed through headphones. The harbor sounded normal for several seconds. Then the waves disappeared. I could still see them through the doorway, folding over the black rocks below the lighthouse. I could feel the vibration when they struck. In the headphones, there was only wind and the faint knock of rigging against a mast. I checked the microphone. It was working. I made a fresh recording and played it through a separate device. No waves. Has the sea always been missing from the recording? I asked. Ruth stood in the doorway. Since September. What else is missing? Gulls, the bell at St. Orla's, footsteps in the north hallway of the school, Mr. Baines's screen door. That specific? His was the only one that slammed in an east wind. I removed the headphones. You are describing different sources on different circuits. They disappeared in that order. From recordings. From town. A truck passed on the road above us. Its tires made no sound. I watched until it was gone. What did I just see? Evan Dorsey's truck. Why couldn't I hear it? The sound went last Thursday. Ruth took a folded paper from her pocket and placed it on the table. It listed dates and missing sounds. September 12th, South Shore waves. September 21st, gulls near the cooperative. October 2nd, St. Orla's bell. October 19th, school north hallway footsteps. November 8th, Baines screen door. November 15th, Dorsey truck engine and tires. At the bottom, she had added a new entry. November 20th, Ruth Calder, singing. You lost your voice? Only when I sing. Physically? She sang one line from an old sea hymn. Her mouth moved. Air left her lungs. I heard nothing. When she spoke again, her voice returned. Doctors found no damage, she said. I examined the list. The missing sounds shared no obvious frequency range. They came from different places and different materials. Why didn't you put this in the service request? We did. No. You reported speech from the foghorn. That was all your company believed. I called my office. The dispatcher answered, but the connection carried a long delay. I explained that the equipment had been modified and that I might need a replacement controller. Can it wait until morning? She asked. Probably. Ruth shook her head. I told the dispatcher I would call back after further testing. At 5, darkness settled over the island. The November day seemed to collapse rather than end. One moment the harbor was gray. The next, house lights were reflecting in black water. Ruth took me to the Gull House Inn, a narrow building above the general store. My room faced the harbor. It contained a brass bed, a washstand, and a clock that ticked louder than any clock needed to. A radio played quietly on the dresser. I turned it off. The innkeeper, a thin man named Walter Dane, entered behind me and turned it on again. We leave them playing, he said. Why? Company. I prefer quiet. Not here. He adjusted the volume until a weather forecast became barely audible. The announcer predicted rain, falling temperatures, and winds from the northeast. Outside, the flags hung still. Dinner was served in a back room of the general store. 8 residents sat at 2 tables. No one had invited me, but Ruth said the kitchens closed early and placed a bowl of fish stew in front of me. Then a woman asked whether the cannery belts should run overnight. A man across from her said the bearings would not last another week. "Run the west belt," Ruth said. "Leave the east idle." "What about the empty houses?" "Clocks and radios." The woman wrote this down. I set aside my spoon. "You are keeping machines running for sound." Ruth looked at me. "Yes." "Why?" "Because quiet places go first." A man beside the stove spoke without turning. "The Willett house lost its upstairs in October." I thought I had misunderstood. "Lost it how?" "It was there at supper. At dawn it had one floor." "Was anyone upstairs?" "No." "Was there debris?" "No." The man finally looked at me. His name, I later learned, was Amos Willett. "The staircase ended at the roof," he said. No one laughed. I asked what happened during the night. Ruth answered, "The town left." "Left where?" "No one knows." "Every night?" "Since 1953. And you believe continuous sound brings it back?" "We know missing sound prevents parts from returning." I looked around the room. A refrigerator motor ran behind the counter. A wall clock ticked. Water moved through a radiator. Someone had left a spoon vibrating against the edge of a glass. "You understand how this sounds." Ruth's expression did not change. "You understand why I asked for you." The Mercy Bell stood between us even though neither of us had spoken its name. After dinner, she took me to the municipal archive beneath the town hall. The basement room contained tax books, school registers, fishing licenses, and shelves of magnetic tape. A dehumidifier ran continuously in one corner. Ruth placed a chart on a wooden table. It was a modern nautical chart showing the water between Dyer Point and Grayglass. The island was absent. A blue depth marking crossed the location where we stood. "This was printed at 1 in the morning," she said. She set down a second chart printed at 9 the same morning. Grayglass appeared normally. "Electronic charts update by time? Not this way." She showed me photographs taken from the mainland. Daytime images showed the island. Photographs stamped after midnight showed open water and an uninterrupted horizon. One image had been taken by a ferry captain at 12:20. His vessel's radar displayed no land ahead. Through the bridge window, the sea was empty. The next photograph, taken at 6:14, showed the ferry resting against the Grayglass pier. How did he dock? He followed our transmission. The foghorn? The harbor bed. Ruth led me to the tape shelves. Each reel was labeled with a date. Some went back to the 1950s. "What is the harbor bed?" "All the ordinary sound made here before midnight. The microphone carries it through the horn and radio. Waves, doors, motors, voices. The town hears itself from outside." "You think sound proves the island exists?" "Not proves." She touched one of the old reels. "Remembers." I asked how the disappearances began. In the winter of 1953, an undersea earthquake had been recorded 200 miles offshore. Grayglass felt no shaking, but compasses spun and radios failed for several hours. At 12:17 that night, the island vanished from the view of a Coast Guard cutter. The cutter heard bells, engines, and voices coming from open water. It followed the sound and nearly struck the lighthouse when Grayglass reappeared at dawn. The phenomenon repeated the next night. Residents discovered that silent buildings returned altered or incomplete. A vacant shed came back without windows. An unused pier lost 20 feet. A house closed for winter returned with no interior doors. The town began leaving radios and clocks inside empty rooms. The losses slowed. The lighthouse microphone and transmitter were installed the following year. Since then, Grayglass had maintained a continuous harbor bed from 11:56 until 12:17. Why has no one outside heard of this? "People hear us," Ruth said. "They just do not keep what they hear." "What does that mean?" She turned on a reel-to-reel machine. A man's voice identified the date as January 6, 1979. He described being aboard a Coast Guard cutter 2 miles west of Grayglass. At 12:17, the island disappeared from radar. The man continued speaking for 7 minutes. He described following the harbor transmission through empty water. He gave coordinates, distances, and weather conditions. Then his voice stopped. A second voice asked, "What island?" The recording continued with routine engine checks. "The first officer made that tape," Ruth said. "By morning, he remembered us. By the following week, he did not. People forget after they leave? Details first, then certainty. Most decide it was fog. I asked why I remembered the work order. You remembered my name. That was not an answer I wanted." At 10:30, I returned to the signal building. I disabled the adaptive noise gate and monitored the live feed. Low frequencies returned first. The deep vibration of waves appeared in the headphones, though it sounded distant and uneven. The gulls did not return. Neither did the truck. I traced the digital controller settings. The contractor had installed aggressive suppression across several bands. Each time the software classified a recurring sound as background noise, it learned to remove it more completely. The system had been trained to erase Grayglass. I restored the factory settings and bypassed the learning filter. The harbor microphone opened fully. Sound filled the headphones. Waves, wind, rigging, distant engines, the hum of the town. Beneath them, people were talking. The voices did not come from the lighthouse ledge. They overlapped in layers, men and women speaking at different distances. Some recited weather observations. Some gave coordinates. Some asked whether anyone could hear them. One voice said my former name, Lena Shaw. I froze. The voice repeated it. Lena Shaw, audio section. Then Captain Owen Pike of the Mercy Bell began speaking. The words were exactly as I remembered them from the raw distress recording. Visibility less than 50 yards. Steering unresponsive. Bell off our port side. Deep horn every 30 seconds. I reached for the stop control. Ruth caught my wrist. "You removed the town," she said. I pulled away. "I removed interference. You removed our bell, our horn, our shore engines. The coordinates were wrong." The coordinates were right when he spoke them. I stared at the levels moving across the monitor. The Mercy Bell was here? She entered Grayglass at 12:12. At 12:17 we left. The search area was south, because that was where the vessel appeared on radar after the island vanished. My mouth had gone dry. Julian Say died before dawn. Yes. Why did the captain transmit coordinates outside the harbor? He did not. Ruth opened a metal cabinet beneath the radio rack. Inside was a waterproof case containing a compact cassette and several documents sealed in plastic. She handed me the cassette. My initials were written across the label. LS, raw copy, Mercy Bell. I had made the copy before processing the recording. I had hidden it in my desk because the background pattern unsettled me. After the inquiry, the cassette disappeared. I assumed I had thrown it away. How did this get here? It arrived through the horn the night after you testified. That is impossible. Yes. Ruth inserted the cassette into one of the old decks. The unedited distress call filled the room. Captain Pike spoke through static. Behind him, St. Orla's bell rang 4 times. The Grayglass foghorn answered. A truck engine climbed the hill near the municipal building. Those sounds established a location more clearly than the spoken coordinates. I had recognized that possibility 15 years earlier. I had also known that admitting it would require me to explain why a fishing vessel had transmitted from an island missing from every night chart. My supervisor had already warned me not to confuse the inquiry with unsupported speculation. So I filtered the recording. I made it clean. In doing so, I made it false. Did my decision delay the rescue? Ruth looked through the doorway toward the harbor. Yes. How long? 6 hours. I sat on the equipment case. Why ask me here? Because the system learned from you. I never worked on this controller. The old recording became part of the harbor bed after Julian died. Your filter pattern came with it. The new software recognized the same frequencies as noise. The explanation was impossible, but its shape was precise. My edit had become an instruction. Remove the bell, remove the horn, remove the waves, remove everything that proved the town was present. The clock on the wall showed 11:40. A weather alert sounded over the marine radio. A northeast gale had strengthened faster than forecast. 2 small vessels were seeking shelter. The ferry at Dyer Point had suspended service. Ruth began checking switches. What happens tonight? If your repair works, the harbor bed carries normally, and if it doesn't, more goes missing. At 11:50, the rust-colored siren at the center of town gave one low tone. Windows opened across Grayglass. Radios grew louder. Church bells began a slow sequence. The cannery belt started near the pier. Hammers struck wood in the boatyard. A dog barked from the hill. Residents were not making noise in panic. They were tending it. Ruth handed me a microphone. This controls the town speakers. What do I say? Nothing unless something fails. At 11:56, the harbor bed began transmitting. The foghorn did not blast in the usual way. It produced a deep, continuous tone, woven with the sounds from the microphone. Through headphones, I heard Grayglass spread across the frequency as a living pattern. The effect was almost peaceful. A kettle whistled in one house. A child practiced scales on a piano. A man closed and opened the same wooden gate. Someone rolled empty bottles across a counter. Footsteps moved through the school hall. At midnight, the mainland lights dimmed. The sea beyond the ledge lost its surface. It remained visible, but depth and distance became difficult to judge. The radio crackled. Grayglass signal, Dyer Point Coast Guard. Confirm your position. Ruth answered. Grayglass signal, position unchanged. A pause followed. Station calling Dyer Point, repeat identifier. Grayglass. Another pause. We have no station by that name. The island had disappeared outside. Inside, the sound continued. At 12:03, the North Shore microphone failed. The level meter dropped. Ruth called the municipal building. No one answered. Through the lighthouse window, the northern edge of town became pale. The school roof showed the stars behind it. I rerouted the town speaker feed into the harbor transmission. The level returned. At 12:06, the adaptive gate reactivated by itself. I disabled it. It returned. The controller had stored its learned profile in protected memory. Each reset restored the filter that erased the town. We need to replace the unit, I said. Tonight? No. The marine radio burst with a distress call. A sailboat named Arden had lost steering near Needle Reef, 3 miles east of Grayglass. 2 adults and a child were aboard. Their position report broke apart in static. Dyer Point tried to answer but could not hear them clearly. Our receiver could. Grayglass stood between the sailboat and the mainland station. Ruth looked at the signal levels. If we relay them on the emergency channel, we lose the harbor transmitter. For how long? Until their position is confirmed. What happens to the town? You have seen it. The Arden called again. A woman gave partial coordinates. Wind tore the rest away. 15 years earlier, I had chosen the clean answer. I had protected the official record from something difficult to explain. Julian Say had paid for those missing sounds. I keyed the microphone. Arden, this is Grayglass signal. We hear you. Give your position 1 number at a time. Ruth covered my hand. If you switch channels, we may not return. There is a child on that boat. There are 362 people here. Then help me keep both. I moved the harbor transmitter to the emergency frequency. The continuous tone stopped. Grayglass became silent. Not quiet. Silent. The church bell swung without sound. The cannery belt moved soundlessly. Mouths opened on the radio monitor, but no voices reached us. The lighthouse walls turned transparent. For several seconds, I saw the black water where the room should have been. The equipment racks remained as faint outlines, held together by indicator lights. The sailboat's voice came through. I repeated each coordinate to Dyer Point. A rescue cutter altered course. The relay took 4 minutes. During those 4 minutes, the Gull House Inn disappeared. So did 3 sheds near the cooperative and the upper half of St. Orla's steeple. Ruth watched without speaking. When Dyer Point confirmed the Arden's location, I switched back to the harbor frequency. The transmitter restarted. The adaptive gate closed immediately, suppressing nearly every sound. Only my breathing remained above the threshold. I understood then why the system had begun broadcasting voices. A human voice changed too much to be classified as stable background noise. The filter removed the tone but preserved speech. The equipment could not carry Grayglass as a place. It could carry Grayglass as people. I took the public address microphone. "This is Lena Ortiz at the lighthouse," I said. My voice went out across the town. "If you can hear me, stop repeating mechanical sounds. Speak instead. Do not shout. Say where you are and describe one ordinary thing near you." Ruth stared at me. "The system needs variation," I said. "The filter cannot learn all of you at once." For a moment, nothing happened. Then a man's voice came through the north speaker circuit. "I am Amos Willett. I am standing in my kitchen. The blue cup has a crack beside the handle." A woman followed. "I am Teresa Dane. The store floor is colder near the flower shelves." A child said, "There are 6 green pencils in my desk and 1 is shorter." Voices rose throughout Grayglass. They did not recite names. They described what was there. A wet coil of rope, a dent in a stove door, a loose porch board, 3 apples in a bowl, a coat that smelled of wood smoke. A photograph turned slightly crooked. Each detail shifted the signal. No noise gate could decide what belonged in the background because the town kept changing its own description. Buildings strengthened. The school roof returned. The northern houses regained their edges. St. Orla's steeple reappeared, though the top remained pale. The harbor feed stabilized. Then the old Mercy Bell recording began playing through the horn. My filtered version followed it. The 2 recordings overlapped. In one, the bell and horn were present. In the other, they were gone. The controller treated the difference as an error. The signal began canceling itself. Ruth pointed to the cassette deck. "Remove the clean one. It is not coming from a deck. It was coming through the system's memory, preserved in thousands of nights of retransmission. There was only one way to override it." I connected the raw Mercy Bell cassette directly to the harbor amplifier. Then I keyed the town microphone and spoke over it. "My name is Lena Ortiz. At the time of the Mercy Bell inquiry, my name was Lena Shaw." Ruth understood before I continued. I described what I had done. I said I had identified the bell tones and mechanical hum as possible location evidence. I said I removed them because the evidence did not fit the official chart. I said I allowed the inquiry to believe the raw file was too degraded to interpret. My confession traveled over the emergency band, the harbor band, and every town speaker. Dyer Point heard it. The rescue cutter heard it. Every recording system still connected to the frequency heard it. I did not stop. Behind my voice, the unedited distress call played in full. The filter opened wider. The waves returned first. They struck the ledge beneath the lighthouse with a deep sound that traveled through the floor. Gulls cried over the cooperative. St. Orla's bell rang. Evan Dorsey's truck engine started somewhere uphill. Ruth began to sing. Her voice was low and rough, but it was there. At 12:16, the town was almost solid. The clock moved toward 12:17. A final level meter remained dark. The eastern ledge microphone. Without it, the lighthouse and signal building would not be carried in the harbor bed. I went outside. Rain had begun. Wind pressed against the tower. The microphone hung beneath the gallery, its cable torn loose and whipping against the railing. The sea below looked impossibly far away. I clipped a safety line to the rail and climbed onto the narrow service ladder. Ruth came to the doorway. "You do not have time. I need 30 seconds. The town returns at 12:17 or it does not." The ladder shook. I reached the microphone and pulled the cable toward me. The connector had corroded through. I could not repair it in place. The town speaker behind me carried dozens of voices describing kitchens, boats, bedrooms, tools, pets, and weather. All of Grayglass was speaking itself into existence, except the ledge. I removed my portable recorder from my jacket. It contained the live feed, my confession, and the raw Mercy Bell call. I connected its output to the broken line with 2 test clips. The eastern meter lit. At 12:17, the lighthouse disappeared. I fell less than 2 feet and landed on wet grass. There was no ledge beneath me, no signal building, no tower. I lay on a dark hillside above the harbor while rain moved across my face. Grayglass had returned around me. The lighthouse had not. Where it had stood, the land sloped gently to the sea. Ruth sat nearby, still holding the other end of my safety line. In the harbor, the rescue cutter's lights moved toward Needle Reef. The Arden was found at 12:29. All 3 people survived. By dawn, the ferry pier, school, church, and houses had returned. The Gull House Inn came back without its 3rd floor. Walter Dane stood in the road looking up at a roof that had replaced 6 guest rooms. No one had been inside them. St. Orla's steeple remained 5 feet shorter. The lighthouse never returned. The foghorns and transmitter returned in pieces along the eastern shore. One horn lay above the high tide line. The controller appeared inside an empty lobster trap. The old cassette decks were found stacked neatly on the steps of the municipal building. My portable recorder was in my coat pocket. It contained everything. The distress call, the relay to the Arden, my confession. The voices of Grayglass describing ordinary things. It did not contain the sea, not once. North Atlantic signal systems fired me before the ferry reached Dyer Point. The Coast Guard reopened the Mercy Bell inquiry. I surrendered the raw cassette and every copy of my analysis. My former supervisor had retired and denied remembering the pattern in the recording. The review concluded that I had failed to preserve potentially relevant acoustic evidence and had given incomplete testimony. My federal certification was revoked. Julian Saye's family received a formal correction and a private settlement. I wrote to them once. I did not ask forgiveness. Ruth attended the hearing. When asked where she lived, she said Grayglass. The address could not be verified. The panel treated her testimony cautiously. After midnight, the island still vanished. The town no longer depended on a single harbor microphone. I helped Ruth build a network of analog recorders, telephone handsets, and simple transmitters placed throughout the streets. I was no longer certified to install maritime equipment. No one objected. Every night at 11:56, the residents begin speaking. They describe what is near them. They do not repeat the same detail 2 nights in a row. The system carries their voices until 12:17. Dyer Point keeps one receiver tuned to the frequency, though the operators are instructed to classify it as local interference. I return every November. The Gull House Inn has never regained its 3rd floor. The rooms are remembered, but not missed. Walter says the shorter building is easier to heat. Ruth still works the harbor. She sings when she checks the radios. The sound of the sea has not returned to recordings made in Grayglass. Microphones capture wind, voices, engines, bells, and rain. Waves remain silent. In person, everyone hears them normally. Everyone except me. Since the night the lighthouse disappeared, I have not heard the ocean anywhere. I can stand on a beach and watch surf collapse over stone. I can feel it through the soles of my shoes. Recordings made outside Grayglass play correctly for other people. To me, there is only the quiet between sounds. Doctors found no damage. Ruth says the town kept the part of me it needed. I do not know whether that is true. Last year, we built a small signal shelter where the lighthouse once stood. There is no beacon, only a wooden bench and an old brass speaking tube connected to the harbor transmitter. At 11:56 on my final night there, I sat alone beside it and described what I could see. Rain on the grass, a red cap hanging from a hook, 3 fishing boats at their moorings, a child's yellow glove beneath the bench, the lights of Dyer Point across the dark water. My words entered the harbor bed. The town disappeared. For 21 minutes, Grayglass existed only in the voices moving through the tube. At 12:17, the houses returned around me. The harbor lights came back one at a time. Then, from deep inside the brass tube, I heard a sound no recording has captured since the lighthouse vanished. One wave broke against the missing ledge. After that, a man's voice spoke from the old Mercy Bell call. It was Julian Say. He did not ask for help. He said, "Location confirmed." Then the sea went silent again.